Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The kingdom of Valoria had always been a land of promise. Its towers reached toward the heavens, its cobblestone streets once thrummed with the sounds of life, and its people reveled in the prosperity brought by their late king. But that was a time before shadows overtook the throne. Now the air seemed heavier, the light dimmer, as if the very sun hesitated to cast its warmth on a kingdom drowning in secret. Young King Eric, barely 17, stood before the council of advisors who had served his father, King Alaric, for decades. His coronation robe felt like a heavy shroud rather than a mantle of power. The weight of the crown on his head seemed unbearable. His father had passed under mysterious circumstances just 2 weeks before leaving behind whispers of dark forces in the palace. Whispers that had reached Eric's ears, even if he had yet to speak of them aloud. "My lords," Eric began, his voice unsteady, as he tried to project authority to the older, hardened men before him. "I intend to honor my father's legacy and bring peace to Valoria, but I need your counsel." The advisors exchanged glances, their expressions betraying nothing but the formality of their bow. Among them was Lord Cadric, the head of the council, a man with eyes as sharp as daggers, and a reputation for ruthless politics. "Of course, your majesty," Kakujukuju said. Cadric said smoothly, "Dakri, we are here to serve the throne." But even as Cadric spoke, Eric could sense something in the way the man held himself, something more insidious. The council had been a fortress of secrets, and as far as Eric was concerned, they knew more than they let on about the whispers of dark magic that had begun to creep through the palace wall. After the meeting, Eric retired to his private chambers, where Theron, his father, his most trusted magician, awaited him. The old man had a look of concern etched on his wrinkled face as he bowed before the young king. "The Bronag, I feel lost, Engek, dated pacing the room. I don't trust them. They hiding something." Theron Swite's gaze followed Eric's restless steps. "Your Majesty, you are right to be wary. The court has changed since your father's passing. There are forces at play here that you are not yet prepared to face, but you must be careful." "Careful?" Eric stopped abruptly, his fists clenched. "So, am I supposed to be careful when it feels like everyone in this palace is conspiring against me? My father says that's an accident." Theron's eyes darkened at the mention of the late king. "Hell, there are dark forces at work, Eric. Ancient forces that have long been kept at bay. Your father knew of them, but sought to shield you from their knowledge. Now without him, the barriers between our world and theirs are weakening." Eric's heart pounded as the old magician spoke. The idea of ancient powers lurking beneath the surface of his kingdom terrified him, but it also ignited a sense of responsibility. He couldn't simply let these dark forces rule from the shadows. If he was to be a true king, he had to confront them. "I need to do something. I can turn sit idly by while my kingdom falls to ruin." Eric's voice grew resolute, though fear still simmered beneath the surface. "There may be a way," Theron said slowly, his eyes narrowing as if he was weighing the consequences of his next word. "But it is dangerous, and the cost may be more than you are willing to pay." "What do you mean?" Eric asked, stepping closer. "In the deepest vault of the palace, hidden away for centuries, is a book, an ancient grimoire that holds the knowledge of a weapon powerful enough to fight back the darkness." Theron's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Free the dark sword abyss." Eric frowned, the name sending a chill down his spine. "Kralada's sword, how would that help me?" "This is no ordinary weapon, Your Majesty. Abyss was forged long ago, imbued with the darkest of magic. It can cut through any foe, command the shadows, and destroy those who stand in your way. But it comes with a cost. Those who wield it are touched by its power, corrupted by it." Eric stood silent for a long moment, the weight of Theron's words sinking in. He had heard of dark magic in old legends, tales of kings who had sold their souls for power. But this was no legend, it was real, and it was right beneath his feet. "I don't care about the cost," Eric said, finally, his voice hard. "There I'll do whatever it takes to save my kingdom." Theron hesitated, then bowed his head. "Very well, but be warned, once you draw the sword, there may be no going back." Beneath the palace, in a forgotten crypt where dust and shadows danced together, Eric followed Theron, slid through a labyrinth of stone. The deeper they descended, the colder it became, as though the very air resisted their presence. They arrived at a door carved with ancient runes, their meaning lost to time, but their power undeniable. Theron whispered a spell, and the door creaked open with a groan of protest. Inside the room was bare save for a single pedestal, upon which sat a large black book bound in what appeared to be the hide of some ancient beast. Eric approached it cautiously, feeling a strange pull toward the book, as though it was calling to him. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and opened it, the pages crackling with a life of their own. There on the first page was an illustration of a sword, its blade as black as night, shimmering with an unnatural glow. Beneath it, in a language long forgotten, were the incantations needed to summon it. Theron stood behind him, watching carefully. Aaron, once the ritual is complete, the sword will be bound to you. It will grant you the power you seek, but it will also try to consume you. Eric nodded, already resigned to his fate. He began to recite the words from the page, his voice echoing in the small chamber. The temperature dropped further, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and writhe as if alive. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and from the center of the room, a tear in the fabric of reality opened, black tendrils of shadow reaching forth. In the center of that abyss, the sword materialized, its presence overwhelming and terrifying. Eric felt his heart race as he stepped forward and grasped the hilt. The moment his fingers closed around it, a wave of darkness surged through him, filling him with a cold power that made his blood run icy. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he could hear faint whispers, voices from beyond, calling his name. Abyss had chosen him. Back in the palace, it didn't take long for word of the king's son's newfound power to spread. The courtiers and advisors who had once looked down on the young monarch now watched him with a mixture of awe and fear. His first display of power came when a group of nobles, suspected of conspiring against the crown, openly defied him in court. Without hesitation, Eric had summoned Abyss, and in an instant, the shadows in the room had come alive. The nobles had screamed as they were dragged into the abyss, their voices silenced forever. The display had been brutal, but it was effective. No one else dared challenge him. Yet, as the days passed, Eric began to notice changes in himself. At first they were subtle, his temper shorter, his thoughts darker. But with every use of the sword, he felt a part of himself slipping away, replaced by something colder, more ruthless. Eric's growing power became impossible to ignore. Day by day, he felt the dark energy of Abyss coursing through him, making him stronger, more confident, but also more disconnected from the world around him. The whispers in his mind, faint at first, had grown louder. They spoke of betrayal, of hidden enemies lurking in every corner of his kingdom. He saw treachery where there had once been loyalty and fear in the eyes of even his closest ally. Theron watched with growing concern as Eric became more distant. The light that had once been in the young king's eyes now dimmed. The court had transformed, no longer a place of debate and counsel, but one of fear and unquestioning obedience. No one dared oppose Eric, not after the nobles' gruesome fate. Still, Theron knew this peace was temporary, a veneer that could crack at any moment. Lyanna, Eric's childhood friend, and the last person who still dared speak candidly to him, confronted him one evening as they walked in the castle's garden. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the flowers and trees, but even the beauty of the moment couldn't hide the tension in the air. Eric, you have to stop this, the sword, it's changing. Yashia sighed, Lyanna said, her voice soft but firm. Her green eyes searched his face, hoping to find the boy she had once known, the one who had cared deeply for his people and his friend. Eric, holding Abyss loosely in one hand, turned to her with a cold smile. I'm doing what needs to be done, Lyanna. The kingdom was falling apart, and now we have order. This isn't order, Eric. It's fear. You're not ruling. You're destroying everything that made this kingdom great. People are terrified of you. I'm terrified of you. His smile faltered for a moment, and something flickered in his eyes, regret maybe, or doubt. But it was quickly swallowed by the dark presence that now resided within him. Fear is necessary. It keeps people in line. If they won't respect me, then they will fear me. Lyanna took a step closer, her voice trembling but determined. Your father would never have wanted this. You were meant to bring hope to Valoria. Not whatever this is. The sword abyss is corrupting you, Eric. I can see it. The Ron can see it. You have to let it go before it's too late. For a long moment, Eric stood still, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew she was right. At least a part of him did, but the power of Abyss was intoxicating, a constant hum in his mind that promised victory, control, and ultimate dominion over those who sought to destroy him. How could he let go of something so powerful when the kingdom was still so fragile? His grip tightened on the sword, and the shadows around them seemed to deepen as though responding to his unspoken thought. "I'm the king now," Eric said, quietly, his voice hardening. "I will not be weak like my father." Lyanna's face crumpled in disappointment, and she shook her head. "Then you're already lost." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Eric alone in the gathering darkness. As her footsteps faded, the whispers in his mind grew louder, more insistent. They mocked his momentary doubt, reminded him of his enemies, and urged him to take control, to purge his kingdom of all who would dare oppose him. Theron, who had watched the exchange from a distance, knew that the time to act was running out. The young king was slipping further into darkness, and if they didn't stop him soon, there would be nothing left of the boy who had once been destined for greatness. That night, Theron met secretly with a group of trusted allies, those who still remembered the king before Abyss had claimed him. Lyanna was among them, her face pale but resolute. "Hey, we have to destroy the sword." She said, her voice trembling with the weight of the word. Frey nodded. "Yes, but it won't be easy. The sword is bound to him now. He'd give it up willingly, and it's more powerful than we could have imagined. We must act quickly, before the corruption consumes him entirely." A plan was formed, a dangerous, desperate plan. Theron would create a spell to sever the bond between Eric and the Abyss, but the spell required direct contact with the sword, a task that could very well cost them their lives. The next day, as the rebellion began to swell outside the palace walls, Theron and Lyanna made their move. Under the cover of night, they entered the king's private chamber. Eric was sitting by the fireplace, Abyss resting on his lap, his eyes glazed over as he stared into the flame. The shadows in the room twisted unnaturally like living creatures, feeding on the darkness that now consumed their king. "Eric," Theron began cautiously, stepping forward. "Oh, great. We need to talk." Eric looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Care talk. There shouldn't have anything left to talk about, old man. The kingdom is mine, and so I'll do whatever it takes to keep it that way." "Your kingdom." Theron's voice was steady, but his heart pounded in his chest. "This is no longer your kingdom, Eric. It belongs to the darkness now. And if you don't let go of that sword, it will destroy everything, including you." Eric stood, the sword gleaming ominously in his hand. "I don't need your advice anymore. Theron, you've always been weak. You and my father both." Lyanna stepped forward, her voice desperate. "Please, Eric, listen to us. We're really trying to save you." But Eric's eyes had grown cold and distant, his once warm features now hardened by the sword. "Cell influence. Gar save me." "Gar," he sneered. "Gar, I don't need saving." Theron knew there was no time to waste. With a sharp flick of his hand, he began to chant the spell, his voice rising in intensity as the magic took hold. The air in the room crackled with energy, and for the first time, Eric hesitated. The sword vibrated violently in his grip, as if it could sense what was coming, and the shadows around him grew darker, more menacing. "What are you doing?" Eric snarled, his voice deepening with a strange, unnatural timbre. Theron didn't stop. The spell surged through the air, and with one final burst of power, the connection between Eric and the Abyss began to fracture. The sword screamed in a language no human could understand, and Eric's eyes widened in pain and shock as the dark energy inside him started to unravel. But it wasn't enough. The bond was too strong, the sword too deeply embedded in Eric's soul. Theron could feel his strength waning, and just as he was about to collapse, Lyanna rushed forward, grabbing the hilt of Abyss. The moment her hand touched the blade, a surge of darkness flooded into her, but she held on, her face contorted with pain as she helped Theron complete the spell. Together, they poured every last ounce of their strength into breaking the sword. "Hess, hold on, Eric." With a deafening crack, the sword shattered. A blast of dark energy exploded from the broken blade, sending Eric, Theron, and Lyanna flying across the room. Shadows screamed and writhed, then dissipated into the air like smoke caught in a breeze. For a moment, all was silent. Eric lay on the ground, gasping for breath, his mind foggy as he struggled to understand what had just happened. The whispers were gone. The weight of the sword, the darkness, it was all gone. He felt lighter, weaker, but free. Lyanna groaned from where she had fallen, her body trembling from the strain. Devron crawled over to her, his old bones creaking, but relief washing over his face. Scarlet sighed. "Untie," he whispered. Eric slowly sat up, his eyes wide with realization. What have I done? Theron met his gaze, his expression sorrowful, but relieved. "HFY, you were lost, but you re free now." Eric's saying shook as he looked at the shattered remains of Abyss. The memories of everything he had done, every life he had taken, every ounce of cruelty he had unleashed flooded back in an instant. A sob escaped his throat, and he buried his face in his hand. Lyanna reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll rebuild together." But Eric knew that no matter how much they rebuilt, the scars of his reign would never fade.